You and I are the kind of people who feel and take on responsibilities with great avidity, but it isn't to some idea of the truth, except in a very ultimate and almost tautological sense. I think that when I move to write a story, it's not because I've heard a story, because I've heard, like everyone else, thousands of stories. It's because I hear language in my head. I hear a sentence. And I hear a voice. I hear voices, and then sometimes I just have a first sentence.
And you go on hearing that voice?
Yes.
So it's like a dictation?
Yes, a dictation which then I can revise many times. But I mean, I remember one story, I heard a sentence in my head, I went to see the beautiful things. And then another voice says, no. The voice says, I went to see the beautiful things, and you know, and then another voice says, what? And then the first voice says, they're still there. And then the other voice says, ah, but they won't be there for long. And I said to myself, who are these people? What are they saying? What are they talking about? And so it isn't exactly dictation, it's more like induction. Given the fact that I now have 4 lines on the page, what can I make of this? And sometimes I have to stop, and it takes days before I can figure out what the next line is. Or sometimes I go 5 pages and I'm stopped. The voices aren't talking anymore. Or in the case of one story, I heard the last line. The last line was, Sisyphus, I, nothing but nothing can tear me away from this rock. And I thought, now who is this grim stoical person who is proclaiming his or her fidelity to an unbearable situation? And I began to reason backward. Well, it could be a story of someone who, etc., etc. So for me, it's absolutely a process of invention, and one intimately connected with language, with tone, with voice.
I mean, maybe it's very interesting that, because it is, once more, and we've often touched upon this, because maybe we arrive at something quite similar, but it is the reverse process. I mean, for me, there's never that voice at the beginning. There is the enormous difficulty of seeing that situation, that person, of following
I don't
them.
see, I hear.
No, I see.
That's perhaps why I like to make movies, because I don't see. I only hear when I write, and therefore I want very much to see. And that I like to do with images.
And then when that person
language
is really there, which is probably in the real time of writing, somewhere around about 2/3, not necessarily 2/3 of the text, but 2/3 of the writing time, the months or the years, then suddenly the voices come. And then I just write. I mean, but they come after the situation or the people have been established, not before.
No, for me the people come out of the language. I feel...
And for me, the language comes out of the people.
I think my attitude is really... Well, for one thing, I mean, it's very clear from our conversation that I'm really loyal to certain modernist assumptions about art, about literature, which I think you have come to question and abandoned the practice of, because I think of earlier work of fiction of yours, like your novel G. You were doing then something that is closer to what I continue to do as a fiction writer, but the stories that you've been writing recently about peasant life are, I think, I don't know whether you feel that, in a very different mode or a very different model.
But because the subject is so different, I think. It's true.
But haven't you changed, John? Haven't you yourself changed?
I don't know. I had to relearn to write. That's true. Because the experience of the underprivileged or of peasants is very different from the experience of the privileged, and G is a book about them.
But do you constitute yourself as a reporter of your experience? I don't feel that I'm reporting on my experience at all.
No, I don't. Because I believe absolutely in experience being shareable. I believe that the imagination is precisely that. It begins very early in childhood. It begins with the identification of a child with a toy or with an animal. That capacity of empathy is, it seems to me, the first fruit of that social creation, which is imagination. And if in general today there is a kind of failure of nerve in fiction, What do I mean by that? I mean that...
Yes, what do you mean by that?
well, I mean that most novels, probably, are really now disguised autobiographies. And on the other hand, people say, how do you have the right to write about peasants? You're not a peasant. How do you have the right to write about, for you to write about men? You're not a man, or vice versa. And these questions are very current. And the crisis of nerve, the failure of nerve, is that it is not possible to write about what one has not lived, or of what one has not seen. But I don't believe that.
You think that's why there's so many novels about professors, because
Yes,
professors
of course, of course.
or about
Yes.
writers.
Yes, obviously. And finally,
Don't you think this also has to do with the competition of other modes of storytelling? Because we've gone from the